Welcome to day 2 of our daily Bible devotions. We continue our discussion on the moral argument. Remember, yesterday we talked about I asked the question about the Squid Game. And here's something that we need to think about when we're discussing the objectivity of morality. We have defined what objective and what subjective is. What's the difference between the two? Now, some people argue that morality could have evolved. Okay, it's not objective because there are no moral facts. Morality is something that simply evolved over time across culture. But speaking of culture and history, again, if you examine history, you look back, look at every culture, every generation, killing is always bad. Stealing is always bad. And it's always bad because it was never agreed upon. It was never liked. It was never considered as something good. Why is that? And if we will argue on the evolution of morality, think about the game Squid Game. Okay? If morality evolved because it allowed people to have a better chance at survival, look at the game. The person who won the game, he survived. Everyone else died. He survived. It could have normalized killing. It could have justified everything that happened. His morality could have been shaped by the fact that he survived. And yet, if you will look at the ending of the game, at the ending of the series, even though he survived, it did not mean that that will shape his morality. Even if killing, stealing, and raping will allow people to have a better chance at survival, do you really think that it will change your morality in a sense that you will start approving the killing, the raping, and the stealing? I don't think so. Now, just me. You can tell me if I'm wrong, but think about it. Again, think about it hard. Isn't it that morality is something that is not adjustable based on our chances of survival? Even if something will allow you to survive, you will choose to sacrifice. Now let's go back to the moral argument. Let's examine the argument again. Premise 1 says, if objective moral values and duties are objectively real, then God exists. That's premise 1. Premise 2, objective moral values and duties are objectively real. The conclusion is God exists. Now, we have defined, in a sense, the difference between objective and subjective. Now we need to define moral values and duties. What are moral values and duties? Now, as a definition, let's take this. Moral values refers to a general category of all that is good. Everything that we consider good, generally speaking, those are moral values. What are moral duties? It refers to the class of values to which one is morally obligated. Now, there's obligation involved. Moral values refers to things that are good. Moral duties refers to things that we need to do, the good things that we need to do, we have obligation to do. Now, the important point is this. Just because a certain moral value is good, it doesn't follow that I am morally responsible for it. For example, being a medical doctor or a teacher or a scientist or a fireman, it means they're all morally praiseworthy, right? But no one person is responsible for all of them. Just because it is good to be a doctor, you ought to be a doctor. Not because it's good to be a teacher or a scientist, you ought to be a teacher or a scientist. If you choose to become a doctor instead of becoming a fireman, for example, you have not done anything wrong. But by choosing to become a doctor, it assumes certain moral duties, and these moral duties, this set of moral duties does not apply to a fireman. So when a patient is dying on a hospital table, dying because of a treatable disease, the doctor bears certain moral responsibilities towards the patient that are not true of a fireman. The fireman would say, I'm not a doctor, right? I mean, it's good to be a fireman, but it's not your responsibility to do the good that the dying person needs. To give another example, it is a moral value to have every child on this planet fed and clothed. Now, that includes any of the children living all across the globe. Now, the parents are responsible for making sure that their children are clothed and fed in a way that they're not responsible for every other child. If you're a parent, you're responsible for your own child, but not for every other child. They could not do that even if they wanted to. It is not a duty for which they could be held accountable, as is the case for their own children. Obligation is not created simply by something being good. So that's why we create the distinction between moral values and moral duties. Not because something is considered as morally valuable, that doesn't mean that you are already morally obliged to do that. Tomorrow we will continue to examine the moral argument by looking at the veracity of premise 1. We are not going to premise 1 yet. We are just examining the definition. Tomorrow we're going to examine premise 1.